It's an honor to be introducing FBI Director Christopher Wray, who will be our final keynote speaker, followed by a fireside chat with Chancellor Diermeier. The FBI is critically important to every topic we've discussed over the past 2 days. While protecting Americans from the threat of terrorism is the FBI's top priority, the range of threats the agency engages in is vast, from cyber attacks to economic espionage to violent crime and drug trafficking. Under Director Wray's leadership, the FBI has worked hard to outpace adversaries in cyberspace, disrupting cyber operations, arresting cyber criminals, and protecting American intellectual property with thousands of investigations across all FBI field offices. The FBI has also played a critical role in addressing the fentanyl crisis. When earlier today, DEA Administrator Ann Milgram referenced that enough fentanyl has been seized to kill hundreds of millions of Americans, she was talking about the work of the FBI in partnership with the DEA. All of this under Director Wray's leadership. Director Wray has served in and out of government since 9/11 across 3 presidential administrations, both Republican and Democrat. He has seen the job and the Justice Department in all of its missions over the years, from serving as a line prosecutor to leading the Justice Department's criminal division in the aftermath of 9/11, and now as director of the FBI. When Director Wray was first nominated in 2017 to lead the FBI, Governor Chris Christie immediately endorsed him, saying, "I have the utmost confidence in Chris. He has absolute integrity and honesty." Now, while Governor Christie is known for speaking truth to power, I thought I'd validate that statement, so I did a little bit of reference checking. Background check, so to speak. I hope you don't mind, sir. What I learned is that you're admired by those who you work for, with those who work for you, and as a consummate professional and leader. To underscore this point, I'll share one comment I received from one of your former intelligence community colleagues. No one cares more about the FBI's people, its mission, and the nation than Chris Wray. He is cool under stress and the best teammate. Please help me in welcoming FBI Director Christopher Wray to the stage.
Well, thanks, Nilu, and good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here at Vandy and to be here with all of you and the decades of experience you represent in academia, national security and defense, cybersecurity, the energy sector, innovation, finance, law. It's really a staggering array of fields, and when you bring that many different perspectives together, there's a good chance we'll all walk away with some pretty world-shifting ideas. So thanks to the folks at Vanderbilt for hosting us. I am particularly grateful to be here with my counterparts from some of the FBI's closest partner agencies, the CIA, NSA, CISA, the DEA. From my frequent conversations with their leadership, I know those agencies share a recognition that we're facing an evolving and unique threat landscape, something everyone here seems to agree on, too. So I appreciate being able to address you alongside those agencies because, as I'll talk about a bit later on, the way the FBI is dealing with the here and now threats that make up today's landscape is in part through relentless partnerships with those agencies, with you, and with others in the U.S. and around the world. Vanderbilt's choice to focus this year's summit on the challenges posed by the People's Republic of China echoes the Bureau's own assessment of that threat, an assessment we've been beating the drum on for years. Because from the FBI's perspective, these threats are not over the horizon. They're upon us now. I'm talking about everything from indiscriminate hacking to economic espionage to transnational repression to fentanyl and the precursor chemicals that are coming out of China and ending up in our communities. What we're facing today is the CCP throwing its whole government into undermining the security of the rule of law world. At the FBI, PRC aggression and criminality has required us to commit our counterintelligence, cybersecurity, and criminal investigative resources because the Chinese government's actions have proven again and again that it is a combined counterintelligence, cybersecurity, and criminal threat. Part of that threat is driven by the CCP's aspirations to wealth and power. Through plans like Made in China 2025 and its series of 5-year plans, Beijing is seeking to seize economic development in the areas most critical to tomorrow's economy. And they don't have any reservations about stealing their way to the top. We have seen Beijing hit just about every industry we have, everything from biotech to aviation, to advanced technologies like AI, to different forms of healthcare and agriculture, to steal our intellectual property, technology, and research. You could close your eyes and pull an industry or sector out of the hat, and the chances are Beijing has targeted it. The PRC is engaged in the largest and most sophisticated theft of intellectual property and expertise in the history of the world, leveraging its most powerful weapons, starting with cyber. To give you a sense of the scale of China's cyber activity, if you took all of the FBI cyber agents and cyber intelligence analysts and focused them exclusively on China, so forget ransomware, forget Iran, forget Russia, Chinese hackers would still outnumber FBI cyber personnel by at least 50 to 1. And that's actually a probably pretty conservative estimate because the Chinese government has also shown a penchant for hiring cyber criminals to do its bidding. In effect, cyber mercenaries further supplementing that gigantic cyber workforce. One thing is clear. China's hacking program is larger than that of every other major nation combined. And that size advantage is only magnified by the PRC military and intelligence services' growing use of artificial intelligence, built in large part on innovation and data stolen from us to enhance its hacking operations, including to steal yet more tech and data. And the PRC cyber threat is made vastly more harmful by the way the Chinese government combines cyber with traditional espionage, economic espionage, and with its efforts to export its repression and malign influence to other nations, including our own. Now, a few years ago, we might have said that China represents the most significant long-term threat. That's no longer the best way to describe the danger. ODNI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, assessed last year that Beijing is trying to build the capability to deter U.S. intervention in a crisis between China and Taiwan by 2027. 2027 is not exactly long-term. In reality, it's not even around the corner. We're feeling some of the effects today. In government, all across government, we're looking at the 2024 budgets being written now as the determinants of what resources we're going to have available to confront China in 2027. In the private sector and academia, too, the investments, partnerships, security, and capabilities that you're building today will dictate how those sectors are prepared or not 3 short years from now. And as I'll discuss, we're also already battling today preliminary steps, which include cyber intrusions and criminal activity that China is already taking along their march to preparedness. The subject of the PRC's desire to dictate America's responses to its aggression is a good segue to our discussion of critical infrastructure. Because I can tell you, we at the FBI are particularly concerned about the threats that Beijing's activities pose to those sectors. And there's no better way to close out this summit than to spend a few minutes reflecting on this singular threat and on what the FBI and our partners, including many of those here today, can do to safeguard our nation. To the average person, critical infrastructure is largely invisible. These are sectors whose existence we don't often think about or appreciate as long as they're working right. But these vital sectors, we're talking about everything from water treatment facilities and energy grids to transportation and information technology, form the backbone of our society. And what a lot of Americans may not be tracking closely is that China is positioning its enormous hacking enterprise, remember, 50 to 1, for more than just the outrageous theft campaign I described a few minutes ago. It's using that mass, those numbers, to give itself the ability to physically wreak havoc on our critical infrastructure at a time of its choosing. The PRC has made it clear that it considers every sector that makes our society run fair game in its bid to dominate on the world stage, and that its plan is to land low blows against civilian infrastructure to try to induce panic and break America's will to resist. We've been countering this growing danger for years now. China-sponsored hackers pre-positioned for potential cyber attacks against U.S. oil and natural gas companies all the way back in 2011. And while it is often hard to tell what a hacker plans to do with their illicit network access, that is it theft, is it damage, until they take the final step and show their hand, these hackers' behavior said a lot about their intentions. When one victim company set up a honeypot, which is essentially a trap designed to look like a legitimate part of a computer network with decoy documents, it took those Chinese hackers all of 15 minutes to steal the data related to the control and monitoring systems while ignoring financial and business-related information, which suggests their goals were even more sinister than stealing a leg up economically. That was just one victim, and we tracked a total of 23 pipeline operators targeted by those actors. More recently, you may have heard about a group of China-sponsored hackers known as Volt Typhoon. Now, in that case, we found persistent PRC access in our critical telecommunications, energy, water, and other infrastructure sectors. They were hiding inside our networks using tactics known as living off the land, essentially exploiting built-in tools that already exist on victim networks to get their sinister job done, tools that network defenders expect to see and use and so don't raise suspicions, while they also operated botnets to further conceal their malicious activity and the fact that it was all coming from China. All of this with the goal of giving the Chinese government the ability to wait for just the right moment to deal a devastating blow. This kind of specific targeting of critical infrastructure is on top of China's scattershot, indiscriminate cyber campaigns that hit critical infrastructure along with thousands of other victims. One of the most egregious examples of this in recent memory was the 2021 Microsoft Exchange compromise. In that case, hackers operating out of China exploited previously unknown vulnerabilities called zero-day exploits and compromised more than 10,000 U.S. networks, moving quickly and irresponsibly to do so before those vulnerabilities were disclosed to the public. The hackers targeted networks across a wide range of sectors from infectious disease research to defense contractors. And their method was to plant malicious code that created a backdoor and gave them continued remote access to the victims' networks. That campaign echoed earlier PRC attacks on managed service providers, compromising the companies that serve as gateways to thousands of others who rely on the MSPs for data services, and then compromising all of those companies in turn. So while the Volt Typhoon story understandably caused quite a stir because of the sheer magnitude of the operation, the fact is the PRC's targeting of our critical infrastructure is both broad and unrelenting. But you know what they say about best laid plans. At the FBI, we've mobilized across the organization to thwart China's schemes to steal and sabotage their way to the top. And I think it is fair to say that there are few parts of the FBI not involved in the China fight across our 56 field offices, headquarters, and in our offices around the world. One key to being successful in this fight is the FBI's dual and complementary mission, enforcing federal law and protecting national security. At the Bureau, we're empowered not just to collect intelligence, but to act on it. And those actions cover a wide range of forms. To prevent cyber attacks, we can often share what we learn through our collection with network defenders and intelligence community partners. Last year alone, in addition to our individual warnings to potential victims, the FBI published nearly 80 advisories on cyber threats to the private sector, arming network defenders by highlighting new threats and describing adversary technical indicators and tactics. We also exercise our technical capabilities to stop intrusions and protect victims, no matter who's behind the activity. And we take other law enforcement actions, too, steps like seizures and arrests, which are key instruments of disruption and deterrence. In the China context, we hardly ever take those kinds of steps by ourselves. Our strategy is to lead joint sequenced operations that bring to bear our authorities and those of our many partners in coordinated actions for maximum effect. As part of those operations, we're often sharing targeting and other information with partners like U.S. Cyber Command, foreign law enforcement agencies, the CIA, others, and then acting as one. When it comes to both nation-state and criminal cyber threats, we plan operations with our sights set on all the elements that we know from experience make hacking groups tick. So we're going after their people, a term that we define broadly to include not just the hackers and the malware developers, but also the facilitators they depend on, like bulletproof hosters and money launderers. We're also going after their infrastructure, like their servers and botnets. And we're going after their money, the cryptocurrency wallets that they use to stash their ill-gotten gains or hide financial connections, hire associates, lease infrastructure. So you could take the PRC's Microsoft Exchange compromise I mentioned a minute ago as an example. We leaned on our private sector partnerships, identified the vulnerable machines, and learned the hackers had implanted web shells, malicious code that created a backdoor and gave them continued remote access to the victim's network. So we pushed out a joint cybersecurity advisory with CISA to give network defenders the technical information they needed to disrupt the threat and eliminate those backdoors. But some system owners weren't able to remove the web shells themselves, which meant their networks remained vulnerable. So working with Microsoft, we executed a first-of-its-kind surgical court-authorized operation copying and removing the harmful code from hundreds of vulnerable computers. And those backdoors the Chinese government hackers had propped open, we slammed them shut so the cyber actors could no longer use them to access victim networks. Similarly, when we discovered Volt Typhoon's malware being used against critical infrastructure, we joined our U.S. and international partners last spring and again this February to first author a series of joint cybersecurity advisories about what we saw, effectively calling out the hackers and sharing technical information that victims can use to protect themselves. And then we followed up those warnings with action aimed at the hackers. Working with our partners in the private sector, the FBI was able to identify the threat vector and conduct another court-authorized operation in coordination with others to not only remove Volt Typhoon's malware from the routers it had infected throughout the U.S., but also to sever their connection to that network of routers and prevent their reinfection. Now, you've already heard me say several times this afternoon that private companies like those represented here, and academic institutions like Vanderbilt are exactly the kinds of partners that have important roles to play when it comes to protecting our most essential networks. And not just as key participants in many of those joint sequenced operations I was talking about. In our country, the private sector owns the vast majority of our critical infrastructure. So it plays a critical defensive role and also generates vital information about what adversaries are doing or preparing to do against us. But the first thing that private industry can bring to the table is vigilance, because everything we do in the government and law enforcement space has to be combined with the public's role in being more discerning and more cyber literate. And that includes resiliency planning, things like developing an incident response plan, actually testing and exercising that plan, and fortifying networks and devices to make the attack surface as inhospitable as possible. Companies need to familiarize themselves with each specific threat and its particularities, create a plan tailored to each of those threats, and then actually run through those plans with things like tabletop exercises. And most importantly, know where your crown jewels are, know how to get back up and running in the event of a breach, and know at what point you're going to call the FBI for help. There's also hardware and supply chains to worry about. I'm sure many of the folks here today are familiar with SolarWinds, the Russian SVR's supply chain campaign that compromised widely used IT software and caused thousands of SolarWinds customers to upload malicious backdoors hidden in innocuous-looking software updates. Vetting your vendors, their security practices, and knowing who's building the hardware and software you're granting access to your network is crucial. So push for transparency into what vendors and suppliers are doing with your data and how they're going to maintain it. And that brings me to the final thing we need to build a strong defense, and that is solid partnerships. As we discussed, the very foundation of our work confronting Beijing. When something goes awry, we need victims to reach out to us immediately, because the first victim who reports an intrusion can supply the key information that will enable us not just to help them recover, but also to prevent the attack from metastasizing to other sectors and other businesses. In fact, Volt Typhoon was taken down thanks in part to help from the private sector, to companies coordinating with us. Time and again, we've seen the best outcomes in situations where a company made a habit of reaching out to their local FBI field office even before there was any indication of a problem, because that put everybody on the same page and contributed to the company's readiness. And it's not just businesses. The FBI has long put a premium on building relationships with academic institutions, too. Building those partnerships means that we can better understand the issues academia faces every day interacting with the PRC. And it means academia can get a better understanding of national security threats and make informed decisions about how to deal with them. So, speaking of academia, since I find myself here at one of the top universities in the country, I would be crazy not to talk just a bit about the people we need to keep hiring to do all of this vital, cutting-edge work. We need even more smart, driven, talented people in the field to keep America safe, people with the technical skills to keep our cyber workforce world-class. So while I'm here, Vandy, among some of the nation's best and brightest, about ready to enter the workforce, here's a plug for both them and the professors in the audience that those students look to for guidance. We need more people to join our elite team, determining who's responsible for cyber attacks, planning and running those joint sequenced operations to knock our adversaries back, working with victims, and often doing all those things in the course of a single day. We need people, talented people, on our rapid response cyber action team, deploying across the country, often within hours, to respond to major incidents, and working with international partners in our offices overseas seeking justice for victims of cyber attacks. A job with the FBI could take you pretty much anywhere, and there is no better way to serve a mission that you're proud of while doing work that is the envy of your friends slogging it out elsewhere. The FBI doesn't do easy. We focus on what's hard, on what nobody else can do, measured both in our own work and in the adversaries we go up against, the most dangerous intelligence services and criminals in the world. And as we've talked about today, the threats America faces from the PRC and many others besides are immense, and we're confronting them right now. Our way of life, and in some cases our very lives, need defending. So think about applying to join us or sending your best and brightest our way. And in the meantime, thanks again for having me, and I look forward to our discussion.
Well, Director Wray, welcome to Vanderbilt. It's
Great
an
to be
honor
here.
and a pleasure to have you with us today. And I'd like to do a shout out to our Nashville field office, because we have great relationships with them. And some of the challenges that you were talking about that private enterprises face, we have the same challenges when we're thinking about our data sets and our intellectual property that can become a juicy target as well. So we're delighted and grateful for the great partnership that our IT folks and faculty have with the Nashville office. So, lots to talk about. Let me start with something that you mentioned in passing. You were talking about the tremendous manpower advantage that cyber operations in China have 50-1 by conservative estimates. You also mentioned the developments, of course, that we see with AI. Generative AI and AI more generally has been a very important topic throughout the day and a half that we spent together. Love to get a sense for both how AI plays into the PRC threat, how it changes the threat landscape, but also how having AI tools available to us may make things easier or at least create some opportunities.
So certainly we spend a lot of time, just like everybody all across the world, thinking about generative AI. And at one level, our experience with it mirrors what you would see in other sectors of society. There's great promise and great things that we can do with AI coming increasingly available, but also great dangers and threats posed by AI, and the PRC is a prominent example of the latter. So while we certainly at the FBI are looking for ways to use AI in things like getting through mounds of data more quickly, given the speed with which we have to contend with some of the threats I was describing, translating foreign languages more quickly, things like that. AI is great for helping detect cyber intrusions and identifying patterns and things like that. But I will tell you that, frankly, we spend even more of our time worrying about AI in the hands of adversaries who have nothing but contempt for the rule of law and norms that we all hold dear. And of course, I'm talking first and foremost about the PRC, but not exclusively. And what we're seeing more and more is that the threat manifests itself in two ways, and in the case of the PRC, both combined. On the one hand, we're seeing a variety of bad actors using AI to make themselves significantly more effective. Think about something as widely recognizable as a spear phishing attack. We all get those emails that are, trying to seduce us into clicking on the link. We all kind of somewhere have sort of formed a basic understanding that, wow, this doesn't sound like English is this guy's first language. There's something kind of off. Probably shouldn't click on the link. Well, AI can now take that adversary and make his English a hell of a lot more natural and convincing. And so it makes it even harder to distinguish the bogus emails from the authentic ones. That's a sort of crude but basic example. If I asked everybody in this room, think about who you're most afraid of getting their hands on AI, chances are they already have access to AI and are using it. At the moment, it's most useful in taking adversaries who are kind of, you might say, sort of junior varsity level and making them varsity level. With the most sophisticated adversaries, like the Chinese, it allows them to take their formidable operation and do it exponentially more quickly and at scale, and the scale's already so significant, and so that frees them up to engage in even more malicious activity. The second and the other part of the threat related to AI that we spend a lot of time focusing on is protecting AI innovation. So much of the world's AI innovation, in fact, I think America has something like 18 of the 20 most successful and significant AI innovation businesses, if you will. And so guess who wants to steal that, right? So we're very focused on trying to work with businesses to protect that AI from being stolen, because you take that innovation, put it in the hands of that gigantic 50-to-1 hacking program, and it enables them to be exponentially more dangerous. You know, force multiplier is kind of an understatement in a situation like that. And so the idea of a nation state that has contempt for the rule of law and is limited only by its own creativity, getting their hands on the world's best AI is a danger that I don't think any of us can afford, and one that we are laser focused on trying to counter.
You spend a lot of time talking about challenges to our critical infrastructure. And of course, you mentioned also in your remarks that critical infrastructure often is owned and controlled by private entities, which makes the role of partnerships really critical. There were examples about how deep this collaboration can go between the FBI and the private entities, and there were some fascinating examples, I think, on that. There may also, one can imagine that there are also challenges and difficulties of how to make sure that these collaborations really work effectively. What are they, and then how do we overcome them?
The challenges to partnership. Well, I mean, I think the way I look at partnership, the best partnerships are based on mutual trust and respect. And that's why I think our partnerships have a competitive advantage on partnerships, for example, that the PRC purports to have. You know, Xi and Putin talk about friendship without limits. That's not really friendship. That's really more of a business transaction. Our partnerships, certainly with our allies, are based on shared values, friendship, genuine friendship, and mutual respect. And that's the kind of relationship we have with our sister agencies, and that's increasingly the kind of partnership we're trying to have with businesses and academia. Now, in terms of challenges, of course, partnership means each side gets to make its own decisions as opposed to having them dictated to by the other side. And so there are always going to be challenges you could argue it's less efficient in the short run to persuade somebody else to do something, or just to give them information that allows them to make responsible decisions, as opposed to an authoritarian regime where you just dictate what other sides do. You know, distinctions that we hold very dear in our system and in countries like ours between the government and the private sector, between the government and academia. I think the thing people need to understand about the PRC is those are distinctions that are at best blurry, if not non-existent, between the government, the CCP, and their businesses. I mean, forget the fact that, you know, something like 50% plus of their businesses are state-owned enterprises, so you're literally dealing with the government. All Chinese businesses are, by law, utterly beholden to the CCP. And their research institutions much the same way. So it doesn't mean we can't do business with them or have academic exchange and all that good stuff, but it does mean people need to be really clear-eyed about who you're dealing with and how you should deal with them.
So let's talk about one business that has received, I think, a lot of controversy. And of course, we talked about it in one of our last panels as well, which is TikTok. An essential tool for many of our students, but many national security officials view it as a large vulnerability and as a major threat. Where do you fall? How big a threat is TikTok?
I mean, we, the FBI, absolutely do have concerns about, national security concerns about TikTok. But they all ultimately source back to the fact that TikTok's parent company is beholden to the Chinese government, to the CCP. So when you think about, if you're the average American and you try to think about how comfortable you are or are not with TikTok, you need to be thinking, how comfortable are you with giving power, access, control capabilities, not to TikTok, not to its parent company, but to the Chinese government and the Chinese intelligence services. So to make that a little less abstract, we're concerned about three things: the data, the recommendation algorithm, and the software. The data, the way things are set up, the Chinese government has the ability to leverage the collection of data through TikTok on millions and millions and millions of users. So think about how comfortable you are with the Chinese intelligence services having the ability to leverage that data collection for all sorts of operations. And again, remember, they're not constrained by anything other than their own agenda and creativity. Second, the recommendation algorithm, which controls, that allows them the ability to push pro-CCP narratives, downplay criticism, and basically enlist millions of people as unwitting advocates of their propaganda machine. That is a thing that is a kind of information warfare that is incredibly difficult to detect on top of everything else. And then third, the software, which gives them the ability, should they so choose, to technically compromise the devices, the phones. So it's your data, it's your information that you receive, and it's your, at least in theory, your devices. And I think the threats that enables the Chinese government, again, the Chinese intelligence services, to execute on, should they so choose, are more than just some of the things I was talking about in my remarks, like IP theft and espionage and influence operations. One of the things the Chinese government has made a practice of doing is exporting its sort of widely understood repression and human rights abuses in China to other countries. So I'll give an example that's in a university setting. This is not a TikTok example, but it shows you the dangers that could befall if the Chinese government uses TikTok in this way. So we had another major university, student at that university posted online about praise for the Tiananmen Square protesters. Again, U.S. student, U.S. university, posting free speech about the Tiananmen Square protesters. Within less than 24 hours, the Chinese intelligence services paid a visit to his family back in China. And this is not the kind of visit you want, in case you're not tracking. And so his parents basically call and say, dude, what are you doing? Like, don't say that stuff. So the student gets quiet for a while, and then a little bit later he decides he feels strongly enough, and he starts trying to organize an online demonstration, sort of a rally in favor of human rights in China. And they almost immediately find out about that. And again, pay another, even more ominous visit to his family back in China. This is a form of repressing speech, not in China, in the United States, on campuses. And so I would say to students who think, well, I don't really care whether the Chinese government has access to my videos, think a little bit about, A, are you sure you don't care about the Chinese intelligence services having access to all those things I was talking about? And then even if for some reason you don't care, and I would argue you should, do you care about them having that access? What about your friends? What about your classmates? What about your professors? What about your family members? Maybe they would care. So again, all of this ultimately is sourced back to the threat posed by the Chinese government itself, not the inherent utility of the app.
Director, you mentioned fentanyl in your remarks as well. I mean, we had this very sobering talk today from Ann Milgram, and I mean, she mentioned it was that we had over 100,000 lives lost in 2020. I think in Tennessee alone, we lost 1,600 people in 2022. Talk to us a little bit about the collaboration between the DEA and other agencies on that, how the FBI is working with other agencies to deal with this terrible threat, and also what more could be done.
Well, it's an epidemic. That's not a word I use lightly. And Ann's point about the number of deaths obviously is a way of capturing that, although frankly the availability of things like Narcan in some ways mask.
Yes.
Because overdose deaths are capped a little bit by greater first response capabilities. And so overdoses that might have been fatal a few years ago maybe are not being fatal now. So I worry sometimes that as bad and awfully scary as the overdose death number is, it's actually worse than that number would suggest. What we at the FBI are doing is we're working in partnership certainly with the DEA, but also with our intelligence community counterparts, our foreign government counterparts, state and local law enforcement. We're really focused on where it is that we can uniquely contribute as opposed to duplicating in the fight. And so for us, that's a number of things. It includes everything from on the prescription, we have a prescription drug initiative that capitalizes on our healthcare expertise, because a big driver of the crisis is, of course, pill mills and things like that. So we try to deal with that part of it. We have organized crime task forces all across, typically have DEA on them as well, that focus on the source of supply, specifically the cartels. We have what we call Safe Streets task forces all over the U.S. in all 56 field offices that focus on the gangs that are really the distributors of this poison all over the U.S. And to give you some context there, the FBI in 2022 and 2023 seized enough fentanyl to kill 270 million Americans. And it's becoming commonplace for me to get briefed on a single FBI field office seizing enough fentanyl in one operation to wipe out essentially the equivalent of a population of a state like Tennessee. And we're seeing more and more our gang takedowns, which are focused on the violence that's associated with all of this, include fentanyl seizures with it. So we're also doing things like, there's an awful lot of this stuff is being trafficked on the dark web. So we have an initiative called J-Code that brings 12 different agencies together that we lead that dismantles darknet marketplaces where a lot of the fentanyl is being trafficked. So those are some of the things that we're trying to do. As to what we can do more of, there is a big push within the intelligence community to see if we can leverage more of some of my counterpart intelligence community agencies to focus more on the flow of the precursors from China to Mexico, on the flow of the money, which is, of course, driving a lot of this. I will just say, since this summit is sort of, focused on China, it's important to understand that not only is China the primary source of supply of the precursor chemicals for all the labs in Mexico where all this, the vast majority of this stuff is coming from, but China is also the primary source of the pill presses in this country. And as if that weren't enough, China is also the primary source of supply for the precursors for meth in Mexico, that's being distributed out of Mexico as well. So if China wants to be serious about partnering let's just say there's a whole lot of work that we're waiting for them to do.
So, this is a topic that came up a couple of times in the context of China, but it goes beyond that, I think, a little bit. We now have our de facto major party nominees. We have an election coming up. I think there's great concern about potential interference, with the election, whether from China, Russia, Iran. What is the FBI's role in that? What's the FBI doing to make sure that our elections are secure?
So we play a number of roles in this space. I think we fully expect in this election cycle to see more adversaries, as in more foreign adversaries, using new technology at a faster clip than we have in prior election cycles. In terms of more adversaries, I think you can expect, much of this discussion started with a focus on Russia, which of course, as is well chronicled, attempted to interfere in 2016, 2018, et cetera. But they're not alone. You mentioned, I would call the other two big players. China, wasn't that long ago, we had an indictment where we had a whole series of MPS officers who were creating fake social media accounts to sow divisiveness and discord and undermine our democracy. We've also had a case involving the Chinese attempting to derail, and that's probably a nice way of putting it, a congressional candidate, where at first they wanted to dig up dirt on the candidate because they didn't like the candidate's views on China. Then they wanted to concoct dirt on the candidate. Then they actually explored the possibility of the candidate befalling a horrible accident, which I consider interference in probably one of the most graphic ways I can imagine. Iran, a lot of people forget, but in the fall of 2020, the DNI at the time, Director Ratcliffe and I did an announcement of an Iranian effort to interfere in the 2020 election. So as far as what we're on guard for, it's all of that same kind of thing. In some ways, people use the term interference. There's also the term influence. A lot of what these adversaries are engaged in are different ways of pitting us against each other, amplifying controversial topics, turning Americans against Americans, undermining our democracy, undermining confidence in electoral systems and elections themselves. We play a role, CISA plays a role, frankly the state and local election entities play a huge role, and I think the private sector and the public play a huge role. To the extent that we're worried about things like synthetic content, deep fakes, and that sort of thing playing a role this time around, it's the companies that are going to be in the best position, certainly at scale, to detect things like deep fakes. And it's the public which plays a role in being more discerning, more thoughtful consumers, especially of online content. And so there's a role for everybody to play here. We will continue to share information. Our focus is on the hidden hand of foreign actors, where Joe from Topeka actually turns out to be a troll farm in St. Petersburg or somewhere in mainland China, not on the content itself, but rather on the actors, the foreign actors.
So in the remaining time that we have, I'd like to talk a little bit about the role that we can play, the role of universities. And let me start with one, I think, particular thing that we talked a little bit, in the time that we had to get to today is, what are some of the, kind of wicked problems, that challenging problems that may keep you awake at night, where universities, academia can make a contribution?
Well, I think a few things. First, anytime there are really smart people who are able to really roll up their sleeves and give a thoughtful, in-depth, rigorous analysis of an issue or the potential of an issue, I think that's helpful for everybody. And sometimes people ask me, what is it that keeps you awake at night? I will say, digress for just a second. I get asked that question a lot, and I will go home and I'll tell my family, everybody asks me, what keeps you awake at night? And they all start laughing, and they say, we just like to see what will keep you awake at the dinner table. But so the short answer is nothing actually keeps me awake at night, but figuratively, Secretary Rumsfeld famously talked about the known known,
Yes.
the known unknown, and the unknown unknown. And we all thought it sounded a little goofy at the time when he said it, but I think he was really onto something. And we at the FBI are very focused and very good, I would argue best in the world, at the known known. And frankly, post 9/11, thanks to a lot of the reforms and evolution that occurred at the FBI post 9/11, we're pretty darn good now, especially with the rest of the intelligence community, at the known unknown, right? We don't know enough about where the money is coming from for this or for that, or what could the adversaries be trying to do with drones that we're not seeing yet? Why do we not know enough about that? How can we get better sources on that? But the unknown unknown is what, if anything, would keep me awake at night, It's just, what is the thing that we just haven't had the time to imagine? And with all these capabilities, with technology evolving so quickly, for example, I think there is a role for researchers of all sorts to be rolling up their sleeves and kind of thinking about what might be 5 years down the road, but that could actually be here a year from now instead of 5 years, and we just don't realize it. Things like that, I think, is a place where it's all moving so fast, and I think that's a place where academia can be particularly helpful, in my view.
I think that certainly resonates with us, and I think having a culture where people from different backgrounds having these kind of conversations, where you have somebody who has maybe biomedical expertise is talking with somebody who has expertise in data analysis, with somebody who has policy expertise. Those are the types of things where often things are identified.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, I'm constantly struck by how many of today's problems and challenges, and that tells me for sure tomorrow's challenges are multidisciplinary. Almost nothing is uniquely, well, round pegs go in round holes and square pegs go in square holes. Most things are oblong pegs in some way, right, or shapes that we don't even fully recognize, and having the ability to have different kinds of expertise complement each other. We've talked a lot about partnership. In my view, and what I constantly tell our people, is that the best form of partnership is where you take our two, the FBI's two, plus somebody else's two, and have it equal not 4, but 5 or 6 or 7. It's the whole saying about the whole being greater than the sum of the parts. And so I think a major university with preeminent graduate programs and a whole range of things has with it the ability to bring similarly that 2 + 2 to make 5 effect, and it's more likely to come up with creative issue spotting and also creative solutions to problems.
So I want to conclude with a couple of thoughts, a couple of questions on students. You made a very effective and passionate appeal to our students that are particularly interested or maybe interested or service-minded. I love that line, "We don't do easy." It's a great T-shirt right here, a perfect slogan. I'm interested in the following question. I mean, we are constantly thinking about how do we prepare our students for the challenges of tomorrow? What should the curriculum be like? And of course, there are specific technical skills that you mentioned that are extremely valuable, whether they're in data analytics or in cyber. But my sense is there's also something broader about kind of a mindset that would be particularly effective in dealing with the type of security challenges that we're talking about. What should we be looking for? How should we think about educating our students so that they're good, they become good at identifying the unknown unknowns as well?
Well, there's a number of things on this front that I would say. I had a great meeting with a number of Vanderbilt students across a variety of disciplines this morning, and as I would have predicted, they had terrific questions, very thoughtful questions. And one of the things that I said to them, just as a sort of table stakes, is that we need people who are better listeners. In today's society, everybody likes to talk. In fact, everybody likes to yell, but they certainly like to talk. And there's the old saying that nobody ever learned much while they were talking. And so training students across all disciplines to be really good listeners. I don't mean passive listeners. I mean active listeners. Really thinking about what they're hearing. What does somebody else think? Why does that make sense to them or not make sense to all that stuff? I think is, and so what I said to them was, you want to have a competitive advantage, be the person in the meeting who's the best listener, and especially with the trends that I was just sort of alluding to, you're going to really set yourself apart pretty quickly because you're going to be figuring out what everybody else thinks and how to align your goals or adapt your goals to that as opposed to just sucking all the oxygen out of the room. So I think that's one thing that could apply to really every school, undergraduates and graduates. I think then there's probably a deeper, more fundamental thing, which is, I think it's the book of Luke that says, to those whom much is given, much is required. Students at a place like Vanderbilt are given, well, I mean, they've earned, but they are given tremendous opportunities, tremendous access to faculty, to resources, to peers, to all kinds of programs. And so I think the question is, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to do it to line your pockets? Are you going to do it to do something good for others, to serve others? And I loved my time in the private sector. I don't regret it at all. But there is something uniquely satisfying and fulfilling about being able to serve others. And I see that every day with the people that I get to work with at the FBI, all of whom, even when they get to the age where they're mandatory retirement age, they all don't want to leave the mission. There's not very many jobs where people, from the day they start to the day they retire, wish they could just keep doing it. And I think that says something, because there's something about helping others. And I think there's even research, to your point earlier about where universities, I think there's actually research that corroborates what I see anecdotally, which is, well, money has kind of a fleeting psychic benefit, power, fame, all those things. The fulfillment that people get from serving others, it really never gets old. And I often think back, and I say to everybody at the FBI, everybody's had those moments in this mission where you kind of, the light bulb goes on and you sort of realize how much that's true. And so for me, one of those moments, I've had many, but one of those moments was when I was a line prosecutor, a frontline prosecutor in Atlanta, working with agents every day on all kinds of cases. And our daughter, our oldest, was in nursery school or preschool. And like a lot of preschools, they had Dad's Day. And so as part of Dad's Day, they asked all the little boys and girls a series of questions. And then they wrote the answers to the questions down on these construction paper teddy bears. Now, some of the questions were a little provocative, like what do Mom and Daddy like to do when they're home by themselves? So mischievous teachers, I think. But one of the questions, as you would expect, was what does your dad do at work? So Dad's Day arrives, and I and all the other fathers are in this classroom, and we're trying not to trip over those like 2 feet tall tables and chairs and stuff. And so we're all standing in front of this bulletin board, which is like a sea of teddy bears. So we're standing there, and this other dad is standing next to me, and he keeps looking over at me, so I look over at him, and he says, hey, man, you mind if I ask what you do for a living? So I look back at my daughter's teddy bear, and it says, my daddy and his friends put bad guys in jail and help keep us all safe. And being a normal red-blooded American male, of course, I have to look at his teddy bear. So I look over at his teddy bear, and his teddy bear says, my daddy talks on the phone all day, so mommy and I can buy nice stuff. And so, even for a guy like me who might be a little slow on the uptake, the light bulb went on. And so my pitch to the students would be, if you want to do something for a living that even a 5-year-old little girl with a humongous bow in her hair actually appreciates and gets as meaningful and impactful, you'd be in the right place.
What do you want to be on your teddy bear? That's the right question. Director Wray, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for your service to our country.
Thank you. Thank you.